United humiliated by Tottenham is the beginning of the end for Erik ten Hag.
They weren't there from the start. It was lacklustre, it was slow, it was pedestrian. There was nothing.
I think the players look dazed and confused. I think he looks dazed and confused. It's an absolute car crash. It was, for me, the worst performance in 30 years, I think, from Manchester United. And what happens next? He will get fired.
It's inevitable that at one point they have to make the decision to let him go.
Who comes in, I think, is a fascinating question. And I think we've always suspected that could be their game plan. If Ten Hag stays in situ and it works, brilliant. If it doesn't, well, come October, November, we'll have a word with Gareth.
Hello and welcome to Premier League All Access with me, Sam Matterface, talkSPORT's chief football correspondent Alex Crook, and the former Australia and Manchester United assistant manager Rene Meulensteen. We will get stuck into Manchester United and what happened at Old Trafford on Sunday in just a second. First of all, Crookie, have you recovered and have you enjoyed the Premier League weekend? Because there are other big stories, including Arsenal coming back late to win the game at the Emirates, and you were there for that. Does that show that they have, in Troy Deeney's words, now got the cojones? And Cole Palmer, 4 goals in one game, a record hat-trick, and scoring 4 goals in 18 minutes in the first half of a match in the Premier League. Pretty impressive performance.
Yeah, Saturday was brilliant. Helter-skelter game at Arsenal, as you mentioned, Cole Palmer with those 4 goals. Sunday was okay to start with. You know, I enjoyed Villa against Ipswich. I think Ipswich again gave a really good account of themselves, and then it all went very badly. I'm sat in my hotel room, Warwick services. I've not opened the curtains yet. I don't want to face the real world today.
I'm afraid you're going to have to do it. Let's throw it forward. What happens next at Old Trafford after Manchester United were pummeled by Tottenham? Back pages of the papers this morning. The back page of the Sun says red rage. Nev slams pub team as disgusting. Ten Hag dismisses sack talk. Bruno says it was never a sending off. Remember, these headlines coming pretty fast off the back of midweek headlines where Christian Eriksen said that the other team, Twente, wanted it more than Manchester United in the Europa League. Ten Hag out of his depth, says the Telegraph, after absolutely disgusting Manchester United defeat. United humiliated by Tottenham is the beginning of the end for Erik ten Hag. That's what the papers are saying. So what are we saying? Rene, if I was a Tottenham fan, I would have been a little bit disappointed that they only beat them by 3-0. Why were Manchester United so bad, do you think?
Good question. To answer the first one, I think the Tottenham fans, are right, because if you look at the chances that Timo Werner missed, you know, and a few other occasions, so it could have been much, much worse. But it's just absolutely baffles me if you look at it, and I think that has been a bit of a threat at Manchester United, that a lot of teams come there and they dominate possession. They are deciding the script of the game, so to speak, and that was never happening, at least, you know, at the time when I was there. I mean, people came with a lot of fear to Old Trafford, but that fear factor that is gone. And credit to Tottenham, they grabbed the game with a scruff of the neck. They pressed, they counter pressed really well, and they just cut through Man United left, right, and centre. How is that possible? I have no idea. The only thing I can say, because as a manager, as a coach, you prepare the team, you do your tactics, you do your meetings, you think you do all the right things. And you want the players, obviously, you know, fill in the blanks when it comes to match day. But they weren't there from the start. It was lacklustre. It was slow. It was pedestrian. There was nothing. There was nothing.
So what happens next then, Crook? Because you spoke to Erik ten Hag after the game, and they've got a massive game in midweek away at the Estadio do Dragão. They're taking on Porto in the Europa League, themselves bruised by a bad defeat away in Norway last Wednesday, Thursday. They will want to make an impact. Then they have Aston Villa on Sunday afternoon. We'll both be concentrating very much on that. So where does he stand now? Because they're in a bit of a bind, really. They decided not to sack him in the summer. They decided that they would invest in players that clearly have been associated with him before, or players that he clearly likes. He talks them up and he sort of expresses that. So what do they do? What's their next chess move? Because it looks a bit of a mess.
Well, it is a bit of a mess. And their lack of decisiveness in the summer, I think, is coming back to haunt them, because you've said it and you've been pretty steadfast, actually. They don't believe in Erik ten Hag. If they did, They wouldn't have carried out this beauty parade interviewing various managers, potentially with a view to taking over. They wouldn't have just activated an extra year in his contract. They'd have given him a new deal. So I think they've led to this feeling of uncertainty amongst the fans, in the dressing room as well. I think the players look dazed and confused. I think he looks dazed and confused. You look at the change that he made after Bruno Fernandes' red card, which didn't alter the course of proceedings, by the way. We were getting battered even before going down to 10 men. He takes off Kobbie Mainoo. He looked injured, in fairness, but Mason Mount, an attacking midfielder, comes on. And literally a few minutes later, after half-time, on comes Casemiro and off comes Joshua Zirkzee. So why didn't he just bring Casemiro on in the first place? So that was a baffling couple of substitutions. He didn't seem to be able to alter the course of proceedings. The players were making basic errors, passing the ball out of play, not able to pass the ball to each other, allowing Van de Ven to just race clean through, as the FC Twente goal scorer did only in midweek. So it's an absolute car crash. It was, for me, the worst performance in 30 years, I think, from Manchester United. And what happens next? He will get fired. You said it on the Sunday session yesterday. They will make that decision. They've probably made it already, be it today, be it after they lose in Porto, be it after they get hammered at Villa, which I think is another distinct possibility. We've got this international break coming up. Who comes in, I think, is a fascinating question. I thought it was quite telling that Ruud van Nistelrooy has been very visible on the touchline, very visible on the pitch after games this season since coming in as number 2. He was nowhere to be seen. And it was almost like he was purposely distancing himself from the manager. Like when you go on a night out and you've got your embarrassing mate who has one too many to drink. I'm not with this guy. And that looked like what Ruud was doing yesterday. So I think he's an interim option. And Gareth Southgate is the name that we keep coming back to, because he wasn't available when they were going around speaking to people like Roberto De Zerbi and Pochettino and Thomas Tuchel. He was preoccupied not winning the Euros with England. But he's available now, and I think we've always suspected that could be their game plan. If Ten Hag stays in situ and it works, brilliant. If it doesn't, well, come October, November, we'll have a word with Gareth.
Interesting, isn't it? Because the reason that I said, Rene, that I think he will get fired is because I don't believe that you create a situation where you conduct a beauty pageant in the summer, where you interview other people for someone's job, and then give them what can only be described as a token gesture of a contract to say, yeah, okay, you can carry on. How difficult is it for managers when there is so much speculation and a lack of uncertainty and clarity from the top about your position to conduct your business and control the dressing room and get your ideas not only across, but get your ideas believed in?
I think that is the big thing there, Sam, what you just said there, because when the players are not responding, which you obviously haven't, then obviously you have a problem, because only performances and results will take that noise in the background away. But just to come back to what you both just were saying, that review that a club does in the summer. For me, the reason you do a review is that you look at the whole moment, the whole time that Ten Hag has been in charge. And the outcome of the review is nothing else that you want reassurance that this guy is the right guy to take us further in the future, because he ticks all those boxes. So therefore, the next thing you're looking for is progress. Now, if you look at now, there is no progress. There is no progress in terms of the style of play, the performances, 2 wins in the league, which easily they could have turned into draws or even losses against Fulham, against Southampton. If Southampton scored that penalty, you get a different course of the game, obviously. A few draws here and there, and obviously a few losses. But that is the main thing. So for a manager, you can only hold your position, a position of strength, if you are very clear to the players on what you want. Your preparation throughout the week in terms of on the pitch, off the pitch, etc., is clear, and the players know what's expected of them. And when you saw that performance yesterday, it was almost looked like a team that played together for the first time. So something is not clicking, that's for sure. And I agree, as an organisation, they will start to think and look at things more closely, and probably it's inevitable that at one point they have to make the decision to let him go.
Rene, let me ask you how easy it is to fix. Because as a coach, I wonder if you're looking at that team thinking, look, this is just basic. We can get this done, this done, this done. In a matter of training sessions, we'll be able to fix Manchester United's defensive record. I mean, look, they haven't conceded that many goals this season, but they look like they could be picked apart at will yesterday. And in this training session, we'll be able to change things so that they can score more goals, because one of the big problems they've got at the moment is that they can't put the ball in the back of the net, despite the fact that occasionally they're creating chances. So is there little things that you could change that would have a big impact just by being on the training ground and being clear with your thought? Or is this a group of players that have been acquired for high amounts of money, and expenditure has been big over the last few years, that actually aren't at the level that Manchester United need to be at?
Yeah, I think a bit of both. I think, of course, things can, you can work on things on the training ground and be very clear. If you look at yesterday, I think the start of the game, United sort of more defended from a 4-4-2 with Bruno coming next to Zirkzee. But there were no cues in terms of the pressing. And if you don't do that well and the lines are not really well connected, then it's very, very easy to get a spare man and then break in the lines, and then you pick them off. And that is normally a 4-4-2 is a very solid defensive shape, very easy for players to understand, and very easy, the roles. But if the cues to the pressing are not there, and people just start to run off on their own, of their own thoughts and their own back, it's not going to work. But I think the problem that what we've had and what we've seen also the last years, especially when Casemiro was playing in the midfield, there was a huge gap there, disconnection between the front line and the back line, and teams were exploiting that midfield area because Eriksen also including, but also Casemiro, they hasn't got the legs anymore. They haven't got the energy anymore to cover those distances. Kobe Mino has come in as a young lad, but he's obviously inexperienced. But that was one of the biggest problems, and that is still a problem now. And yes, they brought those players in, and I think, to be fairly honest, how dynamic the Premier League is. It's a completely different kind of game you play, whether you play in Spain for Real Madrid, where you have possessions 75 to 80%, and now you have to play at Old Trafford or in the Premier League against different teams who are far more dynamic, who are far more direct, far more powerful, and you just can't keep pace. And that's the problem.
Alex, if you go back over the last few years, you look at the players that have been bought, you ask the question, who has been in charge of recruitment? Joshua Zirkzee, Matthijs de Ligt, Noussair Mazraoui, all players that have either come through the Dutch system or play with Erik ten Hag before. Mason Mount last year was someone who impressed Erik ten Hag when he was at Vitesse Arnhem. Andre Onana was his goalkeeper at Ajax. Rasmus Højlund and he share the same agent. Going back even further to his first summer transfer window, Tyrell Malacia came in from Feyenoord, who played against him. Lisandro Martinez at Ajax was with him. Christian Eriksen played at Ajax and trained at Ajax as well. Anthony was at Ajax. There's a lot of connections to football that he has played before. It's very difficult to suggest that he hasn't had his stamp on the recruitment side of the thing.
And I think that's one of the most damning aspects. And also, you'll know that, where the talkSPORT commentary position is at Old Trafford, we're directly next to the back row of the director's box where the injured United players usually sit and survey proceedings. That row was empty yesterday. That was pretty much Ten Hag's first choice team. I don't know where Luke Shaw was. Obviously, Højlund was on the bench. But apart from that, there aren't any excuses. He largely has signed these players. It's his job to get the best out of these players, and he isn't doing that. Some of those players you listed there, Lisandro Martinez is better than he looked yesterday. Manuel Ugarte has to be better than he looked yesterday. Otherwise, they've signed an absolute dud because he was disgraceful. Zirkzee's confidence already looks shot to bits, and you wonder if he's being used in his best position because by his own admission, he isn't a number 9. He's a 9.5, and I think he's someone who's going to drop deep and link up the play, but he's not going to score a lot of goals. So recruitment has been a problem for a long time, and Ten Hag has to take responsibility for this. I mean, he signed so many players from the Dutch league, and he's missed Mickey van der Ven. He's missed Mohamed Kudus, who's gone at West Ham. So, I mean, that hasn't been lost on a lot of Manchester United fans. But you look at Spurs recruitment. James Maddison was brilliant yesterday. Lee Carsley watching the stands. I'm sure he'll be back in the England squad. United could have signed him. Why were they not looking at James Maddison? Why were they not looking at Dominic Solanke?
Interesting,
Who's going to score more goals than Højlund and Xerxes?
Interesting that what they've tried to do, obviously, Rene, is bringing younger players, isn't it, as well? You know, the Højlund and Xerxes decisions are because they believe that these players have got a high ceiling. If you're a coach and you're working with an organisation and the organisation says to you, we want to bring in young players because we want them to develop over time, do you sometimes have to push back and say, yeah, but I need an experienced player in this position or this position to ensure that you can maintain standards? How does it work?
I think we would all agree, and Alex definitely would agree with me, that the club of the size of Manchester United is about performing and winning trophies. That's what it's always been about. So ultimately, the organisation needs to make sure that they provide a winning team. So you need to have the quality on the pitch and the experience, you know, to make sure that they can perform week in, week out in all the games, in all the tournaments, and be competitive. Younger players is great. It's great that you have them in your squad, but that should not be the guiding rule, because you fall short. The one thing with what you get with young players is inconsistency, because they're not the finished article. Yes, you will improve the market value and they improve over time, but that is not what you want. If I would be a Manchester United manager, I want a team that I can compete with the best in the Premier League. And if you can't compete with the best in the Premier League, you can compete with the best in Europe. Bottom line. So who's responsible for the recruitment? I need to sit down with those people to align ourselves to making sure, are we looking at the right players here? Because the thing as well is, the two most important things in any successful club, Sam, is culture and identity. And I've got very strong questions about the current culture that has been established now over some years, not only with Ten Hag, that has started to change after Sir Alex Ferguson left. And that culture is not the same anymore. I can guarantee you that. And the next thing is identity. Identity on and off the pitch. Yes, off the pitch, United is a brand, a worldwide brand. On the pitch, there's no identity. There's no identity in terms that people can associate themselves with. This is what I want to see from Manchester United. You know, a team that plays with high energy, high intensity, you know, always on the front foot, make it difficult for other teams, you know, rip them apart, creating a lot of chances, scoring a lot of goals. That's what the identity should be. So, in my opinion, yes, all good and well to bring young players in, but that is not a guarantee that you can compete at the highest level, that you can compete for trophies.
So how do you get that culture back? What do you do to get the culture back? Because as you say, it seems to have sort of frittered away over the course of the last 10 years. In the modern era, with players as they are, highly paid, and not just like it was 20 years ago when they were well paid. This is ridiculous, unbelievable, mind-boggling situations in terms of the money they're taking home every week. So to motivate them, you need different tactics. How do you do it? How do you get the culture?
The culture, it's all about connection. And it's all about people understanding their roles within the club, no matter what that role is. But everybody needs to be valued. Everybody needs to feel part of contributing a little piece of that jigsaw to everything fitting together. And at the moment, at Manchester United, there's a disconnection. There's no connection. And I think I know that from my own experience, because I know how important Sir Alex Ferguson felt that connection was. He knew everybody that was within the club, everybody that was on a daily basis at Carrington. And there needs to be a really strong and good communication between all the departments, an open transparency, and that everybody, you know, values and respect each other to what they do. That is the big thing, connection. And connection creates cooperation.
What would your old boss be thinking this morning? How will he be feeling about what's happening?
I think he feels disappointed, you know, and sad. And like I said, I know how important he felt it was that everybody knew their job. And I think, and I can only speak for the last 6 years, that I was the first team coach, but I thought he was excellent at delegating. And, you know, that is an art, you know, it's a quality. And the big word with delegation comes trust. And he always used to say to me, listen, Rene, or anybody else, if I don't trust you, I might as well do the job myself. But I got people around me, all good people, that I trust to do a good job. And that makes my job so much easier. and that is what you have to do in a big organisation, and especially you have to be able to let experts and specialists do their own thing, and individually they all get connected together, and that's what makes a strong side. I mean, like I said, there's been so many changes. If you look back to that time, if I go back to my time, it was the manager, it was Mick Phelan, myself, Tony Strudwick, Eric Steele, Simon Wells, and the Doc. 6, 7 people. That was it. You go to Manchester United training ground now, there's about 20 coaches on the pitch. How's that going to work? I had one analyst, one. They've got 8 now for the first team, 8. And what are they analysing? So what I'm saying is there's a lot of waste. There's a lot of waste going on. And if you don't channel that, you need to look through it. You need to really make a good analysis of it and say, okay. And then you need to put a plan of action in place, because something has to change. And if the culture isn't right, inside, it won't also not be right on the pitch.
Okay, just a couple of words on Tottenham Hotspur. We should really mention them because Dominic Solanke has become only the third Englishman to score in 3 Premier League matches in a row against Manchester United after Jermaine Defoe and Bukayo Saka. He's had a good start. And Tottenham have recovered a little bit from their iffy early results this season. They still guilty of not putting enough chances away. I must admit, I watched that game yesterday and I thought to myself, this should have been 7 or 8. It really should have been an absolute avalanche of goals because they had a huge number of chances. I think their XG was nearly 5 yesterday. Brendan Johnson's got 4 and 4 since he quit social media, so I mean, praise for him. But more importantly than anything else, they kept a clean sheet. Yes, Vicario had to make one big save from Xerxes. There was a shot from Garnacho which went and hit the outside of the post. But apart from that, there wasn't too much for the defence to worry about. And they didn't really defend with many players. In fact, for most of the time, they were only really defending with 2 central defenders. The wing-backs were playing in midfield, as they have done for most of the season. Sure, there's a lot more fallout to come, and tune into talkSPORT for the very latest to see what is happening at Old Trafford. And another episode of Inside Devils will drop very shortly indeed on the talkSPORT YouTube channel. For now, let's put that to one side and get on to the rest of the Premier League action. And we go to the Emirates. Okay, let's move on to Arsenal because they beat Leicester by 4-2. Crookie, you were there watching this game and you were pretty damning about Leicester in the first half. You said that they were atrocious. Second half, slightly different though, wasn't it?
Yeah, and credit to Steve Cooper for getting them in at half-time and galvanising them and getting a reaction. I do think Mikel Arteta, and I put it to him afterwards, will be frustrated with the way that Arsenal started so lethargically after half-time and let them back in the game. But the second goal from James Justin was as sweet a strike as you will see. And I guess ultimately Arteta will point to the fact his team kept going. They forced goodness knows how many clean sheets. And actually at one stage, Troy Deeney alongside me, so they're playing for corners. And I think they were, because they realised it was their best chance of a breakthrough. And in the end, the decisive third goal did come from a corner. And they've got the job done. And maybe in previous years they wouldn't have done. They'd have dropped a couple of points. So it's a good result for them, ultimately, with a mad 15-minute spell that nearly cost them. And for Leicester, I think they'll take plenty of positives from the second half. And the fans at the end of the game seemed a lot happier in the away end than they did at half-time, that's for sure.
Is Mikel Arteta the example, and Arsenal the example, of the way you want a coach and an organisation to work in tandem, aligned, and therefore able to be clear enough to and free enough to put their ideas across to the players who then carry them out, Rene?
Yeah. Well, what you saw in that game, Arsenal-Leicester, and I watched it as well, what you saw is 2 teams there. One team that has been now for 2 seasons really progressing, getting better, close to winning the league. And Arsenal is now a team that has the belief that they will score. They have that belief no matter, unless they run out of time, but they keep going. They've got that belief. And I think for a few years ago, they would have not probably turned that around. But now they've got that. These players have so much trust in themselves and they have so much belief in themselves that they still, all the way up to, to the last minute of the game, they are capable of creating something and scoring that winner. On the opposite side of the spectrum, you got Leicester. And when things are not going your way, your well, because like Alex said, it was a game of two halves. The first half, it was just parking the bus and defend, and there was nothing for them. In the second half, it was a total around. But when then things go against you, you try to hold on an extra time to at least to get a valid point from the Emirates, and they concede a really, poor goal, to be fairly honest. I think, it hit in Didi and it went in of his leg. But that is what happens then when you're on that side of the spectrum. Things all go against you. But Arsenal, like I said, they got the wind in their sails, and credit, because Arteta had a clear plan when he came into Arsenal. He knows how he wanted the team to play. I think they've been very good in terms of the transfer market in bringing certain players in certain positions. That has helped the team galvanise, i.e. Declan Rice in the midfield. They're a strong team. And when you win those games, those are the key games that when, they were in total control, they give that total control completely away, but then eventually they still managed, to keep the 3 points and win the game, and that's a good sign for a team.
Is it not to be underestimated as well that they've given him the freedom to chop some big names from that squad early on when he was first coaching, give Aubameyang a new contract, and then rip it apart and say, no, you've got to go now? Big decisions like that gave him the authority to control the dressing room, didn't it?
Sam, the most important thing is there can only be one man in charge. There can be only one man to be seen the boss in a club. And that's the manager. And if you look at Liverpool on the club, Klopp was the boss. Pep Guardiola, Manchester City, he's the boss. Arteta at Arsenal, he's the boss. He's been very, very clear to say, this is what I want and these are the reasons why. And let me get on with it and I will put it into place. And he has subsequently done that. And that is, again, brings us back to Manchester United, where you really question, is Ten Hag really full in charge of what he's doing? You know what I mean? With so much noise in the background. But that is the main thing. Obviously, Arne Slot has come in, to fill the void from Klopp. But again, he's the boss. He knows. He's been very clear when he came in, and he's been very clever about it. And it's not a surprise that Liverpool is doing that well as well under him.
Steve Cooper was a little bit upset about some of the decisions that went against his team, especially in the build-up to the first goal that looked like a foul on Jamie Vardy there. But I'm sure he's got bigger fish to fry over the next couple of weeks. His Leicester team are not going to be measured by results against Arsenal. Newcastle 1, Manchester City 1. This is the game that I was at on Saturday. I thought Newcastle were terrific in this game, Crook.
Yeah, agreed. And actually, I feared the worst when I saw the team sheet. Now, Alexander Isak, obviously, Kieran Trippier was back in there, and he's not been in the best run of form. So I thought it was a game that City could go and win. Obviously, get the early goal, brilliantly taken by Guardiola and crafted by Grealish. But credit to Newcastle for the way they came back. I know there's been a little bit of debate about the penalty. I'm tending to lean on the Gary Lineker side of the argument that actually, if a goalkeeper is going to commit himself, it's not up to the attacker to jump over him. If he feels he gets caught, he's entitled to go down. So I think it was a penalty. It was well taken. And they had big chances to win the game, Newcastle. Obviously, we're going to point to the absence of Rodri and say, well, it's already having a negative effect for City. But I think it is. And I think there's a real opportunity for Arsenal, maybe Liverpool for a lesser extent, to take advantage of that and go on and win the title.
Don't do that, because Pep Guardiola doesn't like you talking about the fact that Rodri isn't here. In fact, he sort of teed up the press conference here on Thursday to build up to the game by saying, when we lose, you're going to say it's all because of Rodri.
He's right.
And then after the game, somebody, and it wasn't me, because I'd been tipped the wink that he was going to walk off if I asked him. Somebody else said to him that how much was it? The absence of Rodri, how much of an impact was it? And he just gave it short shrift. He was not having it whatsoever. He was just And I think the thing is that he's such a good coach. He will find solutions, maybe not immediately, but he will find a solution. You can't necessarily replace the quality like for like with Rodri, but they will come up with a way of playing that covers for his absence, won't they, Rene?
Oh yeah, and the club of the size of Man City should be able to do it within the squad. I think Gundogan, is very capable in filling that role. Although he probably would like to play a bit more higher up on the pitch, but he can easily do that. But they find it. They find a solution. I I think the only other thing I would say with Man City at the moment is obviously they've been very reliant on Haaland getting all the goals, whereas normally with teams you got other players chipping in as well. So that is, I think, another thing, because there will always be a spell at some point if he doesn't get the service, and and they don't. That's the tricky thing where they could find themselves into, where they suddenly don't create the chances and don't get the goals through a Haaland. Then they could lose a few points they don't expect to lose.
He wasn't very happy when I pointed out now that is 3 draws in the last 4 games. By Manchester City's own standards, how much of a surprise is that, Rene?
Well, it is a surprise, because I'm sure that, Pep Guardiola expects to win every game, and he expects it from his players. And that is what you want, from a team. You want to go in there to expect to win every game. But like I said, it shows again that other teams, and I have to say Newcastle, every time they do play Man City, especially at home, they always have a very positive game plan. They really take the game to them. They're not going to sit in. Yes, they're defensively well organised, but they try to hurt them, as much as they can. And I think other teams will look at that as well, to do that. But like I said, they've been going for a long time. And at some point, you're going to run into a little bit of a run of games where it isn't as fluent as it normally is, or, players, get a little bit of stale, because especially if you had a lot of success, recently, then sometimes you can't put your finger on it. You still do the same thing. You've got the same manager, you've got most of the same players, but you just can't put your finger on it. What is it? Why is it not going? But that happens. That's football.
Eddie Howe said to me afterwards that one of the key things was having a week on the training ground to fix some of the problems that he felt they had. I think it's a good mark, actually, of a coach and a manager, that he recognised that even though they were putting results on the board, he wasn't getting carried away. He was frustrated. He was saying to me in previous weeks, my team haven't hit their straps yet. They're not at the intensity level that I want them to be. We're not firing individually in certain areas. We need to get that back. And the week on the training ground, he said I had to tell a few home truths as well, seems to have refined that. And they've probably produced their best performance of the season so far. How much confidence will that give them going into the next few matches where, it's intense at the moment. There's lots of games. They've got Wimbledon in midweek, another Premier League game next week. It's non-stop at this moment in time. But they need to keep stringing results together if they want to get back in the top 4.
Yeah, who'd have thought a flooded pitch at Plough Lane could be the turning point in Newcastle's season? But we've known Eddie for a number of years. We know that he does his best work on the training ground. And obviously, because of the sheer volume of games, as you've mentioned, Premier League managers, particularly the top end of the table, don't get the opportunity really to have full weeks very often where they can literally get their players on the grass and prepare for the visit of a team like Man City. So I think certainly that helped their performance. I think Anthony Gordon will flourish now with this new contract being agreed. I think his confidence maybe was a bit dented after a lack of minutes for England in the Euros, but Eddie Howe will get him back up to full pelt. Harvey Barnes is doing very well. They've got Isak and Callum Wilson to come back, other injured players as well. So I still think Newcastle have it in their capabilities to have a really good season and to challenge for a place in the top 4.
Yeah, don't forget the injuries. It was something that Eddie was saying afterwards. Everyone's talking about Rodri today, but what about Sven Botman, Alexander Isak, Callum Wilson, not available for his team at this moment in time? 3 big players for them, without doubt. Rene, Inter Milan, then Manchester City had to play that big game against Arsenal. Then they had a game against Watford 2 days later. Then they played Newcastle. They've got another game in the Champions League in midweek. It just doesn't stop, does it? And for these big teams that are constantly playing these huge amounts of games, does it have an effect on your level of concentration, your performance, your ability to be able to perform at the top level?
No. I think if you ask most of the players, and like I said, I can remember we had the same schedule at that particular time, and I used to ask players, and most of the reaction, most of the players were, no, I quite like it. I quite like to have a lot of games in a sequence, because they get into a flow, they get into a rhythm. Making sure you get fresh legs, you need to take into account, the travel times, the recovery times, etc. But when you do know, when the squad knows that the manager relies on the squad, so players need to be ready all the time, and they need to be ready to perform when asked upon. But like I said, most of the players will say, no, they don't mind it. They quite like a lot of games. But like I said, you're going to have lesser time on the training ground because, you're constantly performing in recovery and preparing for the next game. So there's not that much time you can then spend on the training ground, obviously.
So what do you do? Is your communication got to be very good? Have you got to be very sharp with the way you deliver your messages?
Yeah, well, I would, obviously, you got all the technology now, and obviously, you got your meetings on and off the pitch. I think we sort of staggered all the information in various ways. I mean, the first information would be given by myself most of the time on the training pitch about obviously the upcoming opponent and what the reasons were, what we were doing in training. You would back that up with short sort of meetings about other teams that have played against the opponent, and then eventually it was all about us, like how we will win the game. And making sure that, the players understood. But the key to that is to making sure that you keep especially your video meetings, you keep them short. Really, really short. 10 to 15 minutes max. That's it. Because if you want to lose players, then, and some managers have that tendency to have really long review meetings and preview, players' concentration levels are not for that. So you need to keep that really short, sharp and concise, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's like working with Alex. You have to keep him engaged. Otherwise, he just drifts off, starts using his phone and doing something completely different, and then says, oh, sorry, I wasn't listening. Wolves 1, Liverpool 2. Liverpool now top of the league after seeing off Wolves. I thought, look, there's no doubt that Gary O'Neill is a good coach, and Arne Slot, I think he was trying desperately not to come across patronising. He was saying, Gary O'Neill comes up with a great game plan and we just about got away with it. We did well, but he is a good coach, and he was almost imploring them to sort of believe in him. The fans afterwards stayed behind and gave Gary quite a good reception, I thought, and I think that's a key thing because he could be under serious pressure with the results at the beginning of the season. They're bottom of the table, they're struggling to put wins on the board. However, the fans recognise the job that his team have done and the way that they have performed. And I think it was Mauro Lemina who went crushing to the floor in tears after the game because he felt he'd expended so much energy. But also, the organisation here have got to take some responsibility, Crook, haven't they? Because basically they've sold all their best players over the course of the last 2 years and they haven't invested in any sort of quality replacements.
And it's difficult for any manager to make progress in those circumstances. He's tried to change the playing style so they're less of a counter-attacking team and more possession-based because obviously they don't have that weapon of the pace of Pedro Neto anymore. But I think Wolves fans are largely behind Gary and his coaching team. They acknowledge they've been dealt a really difficult hand in terms of fixtures at the start of this season. Statistically, the most difficult first 10 games of any club in the Premier League, as you mentioned, on the back of selling not just Neto, but Max Kilman as well, and probably not suitably replacing them. I think the players are still behind him. You mentioned the energy levels they expanded at the weekend. I think it would be a massive mistake now if the Wolves board were to panic and change the manager because their best hope of staying in the Premier League, in my opinion, and they are a candidate for relegation, is by sticking with a guy who served them so well last year and kept Bournemouth up in similar circumstances, I would suggest, if you remember when Scott Parker was moaning that their squad wasn't fit for purpose and Gary managed to keep them in the division with ease in the end.
Another new manager, Arne Slot, is doing a very good job at Liverpool. He seems to have fitted in seamlessly, Rene. What is he like?
Not a surprise to me at all, Sam, because I've obviously known him very well from his time in Holland with Feyenoord. He's done very, very well there. It's again a great example of a club that has lost its way for many, many, many years. Not really any the culture, identity, etc. I spoke about it before, but he brought it back. He brought it back. He knew what sort of kind of a club that he was. Again, a manager with a very clear idea how he wants to play. And it was not a surprise. He's for me to coming in to step into, some of my mates are Liverpool fans, and they were asking, and I said, "Listen, you'll be fine. You'll be fine with him. He's got a likability factor about him because I think he's a very good communicator. He's very clear. He's always calm. He doesn't get carried away with the highs. He doesn't get carried away with the lows. He's very clear and precise to what he expects from everybody around him, for what he expects from the players. And he's basically, I think he tweaked maybe one little thing. Other than that, it's very similar to how Klopp wants to play, on the front foot, dynamic, energetic, intensity. The only thing that you probably see at times is that Arne has got sometimes in the game, he wants the team to say, whoa, 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 just keep the ball for a bit. Just keep it. Just don't, we can keep running and running, but just take a breather. Just keep the ball a little bit, a bit more possession-based at times. But other than that, he's obviously doing really well. And like I said, it's not a surprise to me.
Okay, let's round up the rest of the weekend's action, starting off at Stamford Bridge with the Cole Palmer show. Oh, what a player he is, Cole Palmer, hey. Fantastic. 4 goals at the weekend. He could have had 6. He could have had 7 goals at the weekend. He is delicious to watch, isn't he, Rene? I mean, you watch him and you think, how on earth have Manchester City allowed him to escape?
Not only Man City, Sam. Cole Palmer is a Man United fan. Am I right?
I know.
Crookie?
Yep.
He's a Man United fan.
Don't rub it in.
He's from Wythenshaw. So he's not too far. I think he's in between where me and you live, Rene. I think he's he's halfway between the two of us. That's where he comes from.
Unbelievable. But he is, in my opinion, Cole Palmer is one of those players that you want to come to the stadium for. Every time he touches the ball, there's a threat, and he thrives on his creativity. But more than anything, he's very effective. I don't want to make that comparison, but in a sort of the same position. But if you look at, what Anthony has brought to Man United, left-footed player coming in from the right-hand side. You look at what Cole Palmer does. Plus, he's such a goal threat. He's such a clinical finisher. If you look at the variety of goals that he scored in the 4 goals, there's, a clean shot, a great little run in behind, a fantastic free kick. It's just, he's a delight to watch. And like I said, it's sad to see he's playing for Chelsea.
No, it's not, Rene. It's absolutely delightful that he's playing for Chelsea, who won by 4 goals to 2 at the weekend. And I must say, I didn't see that coming. I thought it was going to be a much harder game for Chelsea, but I'm so pleased that he managed to help them negotiate it. He is a generational talent, and Chelsea, I don't know. Listen, they've bought a lot of players that you wouldn't have spent the level of money that they have spent on. We've been pulling our hair out sitting there watching them over the course of the last year or so and the way they've operated. But if they've done one good thing, the owners, it is acquire him, because you can pin pretty much all your hopes on him in certain games and he will deliver for you. That's certainly what he did in Saturday's game. I was a little bit more concerned about Robert Sanchez and his seemingly desperation to come and get involved when it was unnecessary to do so. He was designated as the number 1 this season. They let Jordan Petrovic, who spent most of the season in goal for Chelsea last year, go out to Strasbourg. It baffles me that you can be so good and bring in someone like Cole Palmer for a relatively small amount of money, yet can't find a goalkeeper or a number 9. It's madness. Everton 2, Crystal Palace 1. Sean Dyche will be absolutely delighted with that, Crook, that they've eventually got over the line. We have been saying on this podcast, by the way, that they'll get better. They'll put results on the board.
Yeah, it's been coming, I think, when you look at their performances, that they've not been as bad as the points tally suggests. And they showed a bit of grit and determination, didn't they, in this game, having fallen behind to come back and win. Brilliant first goal from Dwight McNeil. That was probably my favourite goal of the weekend. And I would imagine there are better times ahead now for Everton. The league table certainly looks a lot more palatable with their first win on the board and the fact that other teams are still struggling for points below them. You fear a bit for Palace, though, and Oliver Glasner, don't you? When you look at their start to the season, he's obviously lost Michael Elise. It was his decision, I'm told, to cash in on Joachim Andersen because he wanted to bring in Lacroix. At the moment, that hasn't particularly worked out. And Steve Parish is not the most patient of owners, is he? There's a history with Palace of starting seasons badly and managers getting the old heave-ho. I'm not suggesting that Glasner is in that camp just yet, but I think he might need some wins pretty quickly.
Well, our Premier League preview, I think, at the beginning of the season, which we did in our plush studio in London, I suggested to you and Perry Groves and Leanne Sanderson, I said, could Palace get dragged into problem? And you all looked at me as if I was an idiot. And now there they are at the bottom of the table. You may well be right, to be honest with you. Right, okay, this week, Bournemouth against Southampton, going there today. Arsenal, Paris Saint-Germain, big game Tuesday night in the Champions League is live on talkSPORT. Slovan Bratislava, who aren't very good, are going to get beaten up by Manchester City in the Champions League on talkSPORT 2. Aston Villa against Bayern Munich, a match of the 1982 European Cup final is on talkSPORT 2 on Wednesday, or talkSPORT on Wednesday. talkSPORT 2 has Liverpool Bologna. Thursday night, Tottenham and Manchester United in action in the Europa League. Friday night football comes from Sunderland Leeds. Saturday, Crystal Palace against Liverpool. I know, it's overwhelming, isn't it? So download the talkSPORT app and you can listen to absolutely everything. Crookie, thank you. Rene, a delight, as always, to speak to you. Thank you very much, and we'll see you soon. That was the Premier League All Access podcast. Rate and review it wherever you get your podcasts from.